is LoG, and welcome to part 3 of this percussive fingerstyle power-up. If you enjoy this type of instructional material, feel free to check out my Patreon at the link below. And now let's get on to the lesson. All right, let's get started by recapping what we did with part 2 and figure out how we're going to get into this next part. Part 2 sounded like this. Now that's how we were ending part 2, by just simply doing this melody and then playing this chord at the same time. But now that we're starting part 3, we're not going to do that. We're going to do the melody, but then play this as a little descending arpeggio, like that, and also continue the melody. So the chord is the same thing, except I'm playing the B string and the low E string at the same time. So with my right hand ring finger thumb, and I'm walking down B string, G string, D string, and then playing the B string again with the E now with my pinky. So that continues the melody. So your melody should sound like this. Right? So I'll play that with the chord. Right? So that's what you should be hearing. So that's our little intro part, slightly different than what we were doing, but pretty similar. Next part, we're playing this D, E, F sharp like we did in part 1, except the chord is slightly different. So instead of doing this, like we did in part 1, we're doing this. Slightly different chord. This is like C sharp minor 7 flat 5, half diminished, whatever you want to call it. So the notes would be C sharp, B, E, G natural. So that's C sharp's 1, flat 7, flat 3, flat 5, just the normal chord. And for the melody, again, you want to hear this? Or something like that. I kind of like hearing that F sharp a little dead. It's kind of cool. It has its own kind of rhythmic value. So that's the chord right there. So if you, this chord can be a little bit uncomfortable because this voicing for C sharp, or just the half diminished chord in general based off the E string, is a little uncomfortable. I was kind of experimenting doing it with the thumb like this. Like, I'm not a huge thumb player. Sometimes I am, but if that's easy for you, maybe you want to play the root with your thumb. That might work. I'm doing it like this. Again, the other way, that's definitely the more logical and kind of easier and more obvious way, is just to do this chord here, right? It's the same exact chord. That whole thing would sound like this. Instead of doing the melody and then the chord like I've been doing it, you could, of course, do this, which is much easier to play because you don't have to, cram your fingers like you are up here. And you're also coming from this position, right? Right? And then you're actually staying here for the next part, for the next chord hit. So yeah, you could definitely play it right here, how that would work. It's the same idea. D, E, F sharp becomes D, E, F sharp, and then you play the chord like this. That's our C sharp, B, E, F sharp, slide up a fret for the full chord. That's 1, flat 7, flat 3, and then flat 5. So you could play that. This is the same thing as this. I'm not doing that because I like the tone better right here. So again, you don't have to do this. You might be like, well, that's a stupid reason to play something that's way more uncomfortable. And not only is it more uncomfortable, but I'm going way out of position and then coming back here. Again, I prefer the tone. I think the tone's warmer. Well, it definitely is warmer, and I just prefer it like that. But you can play it however you want. If you want to do this or this, it's completely up to you. So again, those fingerings, you can do it up top, D, E, F sharp. Play the chord like that. All these fingers are on the same fret, E string, D string, G string, then pointer finger back here. It's hard to see on that B string. Or you could do this, D, E, F sharp, then the middle finger ring pinky. Pinky's up a fret from where it would be up here. And then you just move that pointer finger up a fret. Again, this is like the more logical choice. I like that choice better. I just like the tone. So yeah, that's pretty much it. And then from there on, we're just right back to part 1. We're right back to this. That C major looks like this. Excuse me. A little pull off. It's exactly the same as part 1. So all we're really doing here, part 3, what we're talking about here really is just a variation on part 1, right? It's just the first 2 little chord hits are different, but it's largely the same flow as part 1, same melodic material, etc. So after the part 1, or after what we just did right here, this variation on part 1, we're right back into normal part 2. Right? So if you want to look at the whole structure of this first half, it's part 1, part 2, and then the variation on part 1, and then part 2 again. So that's like, A, B, variation on A, or the technical term is like A prime, if you want to call it that, and then B again. So A, B, kind of song structure, except the second A, slight variation. So if I play that whole thing, you'll see what I mean. So here's the whole thing. Part 1. 2. Variation. Part 2. That's it. So you can kind of hear, oh, it's just a little variation there for the beginning of that repeat of part 1. Again, that variation that we talked about today. And then this. Or if you want to do it down here. And then from there, excuse me, it's exactly the same as what we did in part 1. So that's really it. That's all we're doing today. We are going to run, again, a group of backing tracks. The first backing track is just going to be the variation of part 1. So that will sound like this. Again. Over and over again. Keep in mind, we are doing this beginning of part 1 as a pickup, right? So it's going to feel like we're coming in early before the downbeat because we have to. These notes, that's all before the downbeat. Bam, that's the downbeat. So when you're playing over the track, you'll notice me coming in before the downbeat because that's how this melody runs. Bam. Make sure you're getting that stuff down. You don't want to come in on the downbeat because then everything will be offset incorrectly. So that's going to be the first track. The second batch of tracks, again, the first batch of tracks are going to be 75, 85, 90. The second batch of tracks are going to be 80, 90, 100. And this is going to play pretty much like half of this whole power up. You can honestly just use this as your final video for the power up and you'll get a lot of work out of it. The next section that we'll talk about in the next set of videos are completely different. So if you don't necessarily really even have to go through those, you can just do this and get a lot of work out of it. But I do like the other sections because I think they're pretty fun. But that whole thing is going to be the straight thing all the way through. Again, a couple times at a variety of tempos. That whole thing is going to sound like this. And then again, we won't end like that. We're just going to do this. End with that chord just by muscle memory. I just want to jump right back into the part. We are going to end with that chord, beginning, etc. So that's how that second track is going to run. Again, 80, 90, 100. So get all these parts down, figure out what you need to think about to connect everything smoothly, figure out your fingerings, make sure that percussion is happening, make sure you're prepping your fingers like we talked about. Come back to this part of the video and we'll play these tracks. All right, that does it for part 3 of this percussive fingerstyle power-up. If you enjoy this type of instructional material, feel free to check out my Patreon at the link below, and I'll see you all in part 4.